Reverend C.T. Vivian has the awards, scars, and stories that speak of the many sacrifices he makes so others can be free from racial tyranny to fulfill their highest potential. As a child growing up in Macomb, Illinois, the seeds of his ministerial calling and activism were evident. In the late 1940s, he led the first protests to end segregated lunch counters in Peoria, Illinois. Later in 1961, he organized the first sit-in and civil rights march in Nashville, Tennessee. Reverend Vivian was one of the men and women known as freedom riders who tested the reaches of segregation. He worked alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference as a national director of affiliates. He is an activist, a Baptist minister, a visionary who continues to see a world where we all can live in peace and harmony. He's a lover of culture, humanity, heritage, and family. AIB presents Spiritual Journey, Reverend C.T. Vivian.
You see, this prophet, Amos, was a sheep herder. He really didn't have the great education and background of Ezekiel and some of the other prophets, so they call him a minor prophet. But you see, he had been watching sheep. He was a sheep herder. But what he found out is that the sheep are the same as the people in the city. Come on. So that when God called him to come preach, it was because he had seen in the sheep what was happening in the city. All right. And he knew when the sheep weren't doing right. Yeah. And because you think of them as mild and calm and as intelligent and etc. But what he found was that the sheep would break down any barrier. The big sheep would break down the barrier so they could take what the little sheep had. Is that they were big sheep and they were in charge. Yeah. But they weren't in charge for the right reason. All right now. My concept of God was, when I was growing up, that he was always watching me, all right? And he was watching everyone, right? And that his presence was always there. And if you did something wrong, which is really a problem when you're a little kid, right? Because you're always told, being a child. Right? But then the presence of God somehow made me not really ever feel like a child. I've never felt like a child in my life, right? Is that when you go back that far, I knew I was, but I never felt different than if I were adult in my mind. A strange thing about growing up thinking that way is that somehow I felt I was a better man at 18 than I was at 25. Now, that sounds strange. See, you're supposed to keep growing and developing, But the truth is, I really, as I looked back, I remember, I'm past that stage, but since we started this youth thing, is and I never can explain either one of those, that I was always, I didn't see any difference between boys and men when I was growing up. And I've thought about that. And I thought about it, maybe it's because my grandmother and my mother were the dominant persons in our household. And that could be one. My father and my grandfather were both divorced. My grandmother and my mother both were divorced. It was because of the Great Depression. And I think people don't realize now how troubling a depression is. Only if you are now without a job can you begin to start to think about it. Now, get this for instance. Men who, and especially in those days, who put their total self into their work, that's what made them men, right? And ownership, that they made certain that the crops came in, they fought the weather, they had the canny understanding from experience what was going to happen and what was not likely to happen. All of that made them men. All of a sudden, that stops. They don't know what to do with themselves. You know, I was thinking the other day of what happens. African Americans were just out of slavery in 1865, right? We lost everything that we had saved from 1865 until 1930, when the Depression hit. Think about that. That meant not only you had to start over, a people were starting over, because we were at the bottom of that. Now, we were in a town of less than 200 black families, right? I mean, far less. I mean, there was something like 250 black people in the town, right? And we had 3 churches, a Baptist church, an AME church, and the Church of God in Christ. Church of God in Christ was too backward, and pretty soon my grandmother left that, right? But she never quite found a church home anymore. But I did, and it was half a block from my house. And it was the only one that had a regular service. Reverend Thomas was the minister, and Reverend Thomas was a tremendous man, and served as a sort of a father for me, and a very religious man, but a man is without any of the the nonsense, right? I taught Sunday school. I was head of the youth group. All right, all of it by that time. Okay, is at Bible club at in high school, and so that my life was filled with this understanding. At one time, and everybody respected me in my town for that. For instance, I knew that we shouldn't have 3 churches. We didn't have one good one, right? So I went and knocked on every African American door in town and sat down and talked with them, right, about all coming together at one church. And they listened, and they talked with me, and they took me seriously, at least in front of me. You get my point? And they knew they should, but see, I knew nothing about the sociology of religion again, right? They had broken up into these groups for as much social reasons as anything else, all right? But they couldn't keep 3 churches going, right? And had it not been for the bishopry, which I later basically rejected, right? We couldn't have kept the AME church going, you see. And this is where I learned structure in church and the lack of it. See? And in fact, at one time I said I was really going to be a Quaker or a Catholic. What I really meant in black terms, that meant, was I going to be an AME with bishops, or whether I was going to be a Baptist with no overlords, right? Now, if you begin with me, you see that all my life has been a very religious one. And what's important is that youth thing, you see. Amos says they store up violence, and they store up wealth, living on the top of the hill. He says they store up so much wealth that they don't want buildings just made out of brick and wood and stone. They want them made out of ivory. They want to show off their wealth instead of showing off their goodness. In the 4th grade, I had an argument with a boy that gave me a black-faced Valentine card, right? And I hunted him down, cut him across the tracks, and I pushed him. I cussed him when I could, right? I knew how, right? I pushed him, I cussed him, I called him names, I belittled him, but he wouldn't fight back. So all the kids that had run there to see the fight, right, you know, like kids do, they said, oh, boy, he's a coward, and you really beat him up, you showed him, and but I didn't feel it. That was my first understanding of nonviolence. As far as I was concerned, he won, I didn't. As far as they were concerned, I won, he didn't. I remember his name. And that's when that was in the 4th. By the 6th is when I refused, you know, I asked everybody not to fight from now on. I saw myself growing up as a doctor. That was a terribly important thing because I always had a good image of myself. You see what I mean? And what I was going to be was something that everybody would want to be. So it gave me a good image of myself. So I had it growing up, and I had no, and since I was a leader at the church and all of these kinds of things, right? And had my own group at school and so forth. All of that played into my hand. And I think a good image is terribly important when you're a kid. And when I got to my first chemistry class, I realized I didn't want to be a doctor. But but what I really realized is that I didn't want to be a doctor for another reason. Was I did not want to fix up people and send them back out to be cut and shot and dealt with, because that's what was happening during the Depression. We've been so long from the Depression, people forget what happens to during the Depression. It's a horrible way to have to live, right? As a result of that, I didn't want to fix up people. I wanted to change the whole environment, right? I wanted to make certain that this didn't happen to people, that people had some way to live above what was going on, that there was a way to stop people from hating themselves and disliking others and erupting into violence so easily, you see. And that was all happening before I really got to high school. All of this is important to the growing up process. A woman has written a book on me, and it's basically all around the childhood thing, right? And she then worked with some kids that summer after she had written the book and had them do acting out parts of the book, right? Because she saw that all of those early experiences was what really led me into nonviolent direct action, ministry, an attitude toward people, the seeking for some sense of how to live, right, that would make us better than we were, right? Is that, it's that caused me to become a minister. See, I may have missed it, or I may have been just a talker in ministry. You see what I mean? Because I could speak. Speech was always my thing. I mean, from early, you know? And so I could have become a preacher, but a preacher only. You see what I mean? One that would look good on Sunday morning, but not necessarily did anything the rest of the time, right? But later, I wasn't concerned. When I was a minister, I really wasn't concerned about church only. You see what I mean? I was concerned about life. How do we change it? How do we stop people from being overcome by the culture? how do we make it so that they do more than just say, oh, I'll just pray and do nothing more than that? You see what I mean? Now, prayer is wonderful. I look to it, but not as the only thing, nor as an excuse for not doing and as an excuse for not acting. You see, and this is why I was ready for Martin. I had my first nonviolent direct action movement 9 years before Montgomery. You see what I mean? Now, why? Because of all these other things. Not because I just went to church every Sunday, right? And not because I taught Sunday school. All of that ran into this larger thing of creating alternatives for the society we live in. Right? I got one now. I've got the next step in my process is I have CT Vivian, CT Vivian Leadership Institute, you see. But all of this goes back to these incidents and situations and trying to figure out how life could be and how we must live it. But that all goes back to Grandma. And the thing is, great numbers of people that I know that are involved in life started with their grandmothers, right? Is that, and my real problem is that who's going to be grandma for this generation? When grandma is too often young, too young, has no wisdom really, and is trying to date. See what I mean? Who's going to be grandma for this generation? See? Is because I think it is basic to what we become as a people. See, because as far as I'm concerned, what we have become as a people is because of two things. Our grandmothers and our church. Let's put it another way. Our grandmas and our Christ. Put it another way. Our grandma and our concept of God. But you have to make the connect. Is that what the prophets did was connect. Make the connection between wealth and power and the suffering of the people. Make the connect. A Martin King, a prophet in this age, made the connect between power and money and what happens at the end and the suffering of the people. And the prophets were sent to cut that connect up so that the people would not suffer. Those who are not concerned about people don't deserve to be alive. Those that don't deserve to love people, right? And are in charge of people need to be removed.
I was working at Helen Gallagher Foster. Helen Gallagher Foster was a mail order house, right? And she had great taste and built a whole company on it. She was advertised in all the big magazines, etc. And as I was working at Helen Gallagher Foster, and because I was trying to create a black mail order, because it's a matter of income, and it was after the war now and things, and we were having a whole new class of income, if not we were always middle class mentally. We never were money-wise, but we had come to a whole new place. And so I wanted to start with Helen Gallagher. She had about 3 mail order companies that was part of her overall, but 3 names, right? And 3 or 4 names. And so I wanted to be one of those companies. I'm walking across the floor of the mail order house, going up toward the office, when it seemed like the sky opened it seemed like the sky opened. It looked like there wouldn't. I mean, it felt like there was no roof. I mean, it just. And this was a big building, right? And I want to work for you, huh? And 12 hours a day. It didn't sound right. But that's what I heard. But you see, I would have been doing the talking. See what I mean? Because that's what I wanted, right? Now, see, I'm just trying to be very truthful. I could tell it so it all sounds like that, God appeared and I talked to him, give him a report, and I said, but that's not what happened, right? And I don't understand it all. All I know is that's what happened, right? But I knew that was my calling. So I went home and told my wife, I said, baby, I have had the calling to ministry. She said, good, right? But how it happens a little faster and a little slower than that. So I go home, and I'm not for certain I want to tell her yet, right? So I wait a couple of days, and so I come home from work, and I say to her before we're eating, and I said, I want to tell you something tonight. And she said, oh, good, I got something to tell you too. And so I wondered what she wanted to tell me. So after we ate, we went upstairs and got in bed. And she said, tell me. And I said, no. I said, you tell me first. And joked around about, ladies first and all that kind of stuff. And so she said, we're going to have our first child. And I said, wonderful. And we just rejoiced for a while. And she said then to me, now you tell me what you had to tell me. And I said, I said, I don't want to tell you. And she said, no, that's not fair. See, I was thinking, wow, I was thinking is that we're going to have a child. And she said, tell me. So I told her, I said, I have the calling to the ministry. I said, but I'm not going. It says, because here you're having a child, and I'm not going to leave you here by yourself, because that meant going to seminary. That's what it really meant, right? I have to go to seminary. I'll find a way to do that, but I got to do it. And and I'm not going to leave you, and I'm not going to, and you would only have one salary and having a child too. And I said, and she said, you know what she said? We were lying there in the silence, and she says, whose faith is in question now? And I'm supposed to be the faith boy. And she asked me the question, whose faith is in question now? Well, you know how that turned out. I decided to go, right, because I had to. But my minister had been already collecting money for me to go before. I had told him anything about being called, right? Is that, and it turned out, and he'd talked with Helen Gallup Foster, right? She gave him money for me to go to school. I went to seminary, right? And here I am in the dorm, one day, and I'm studying. It was in the middle, in the evening, and the guys down the hall, because we only had one phone. We were a poor seminary. We didn't have telephones in every room. We had telephones on each floor, right? And so I heard them calling me that it was on running the phone. So I ran down the hall and to get the phone, and it was my wife. And she said, "I'm coming to see you." And boy, I rejoiced. We rejoiced. I remember looking out the window. Now I can see it, looking out the window. I don't remember dates. I remember events, right? And here I am looking out the window. And so we're rejoicing. And then I say, how long are you going to be able to stay? And she said, oh, I'm coming to stay. And here I am, dead silence. I'm looking out this window of a dormitory, and I got a room in it. And here comes my wife with baby, right? I have no place to stay. I have no salary. She is leaving, so she will have no salary, right? And I'm dead silent. I'm not for certain what's going to happen. Where am I going to stay, a job, and so forth. Let me tell you what happened. Before she got there was one married student apartment open. I got it, right? When I first went to my first National Baptist Convention just a few months before that, right, I met Miss Bronson, who my minister knew and I knew, and she introduced me to American Baptist Theological Seminary people, right? Is that so? And that's where I was going to school, right? But more than that, the publishing house, everything I'd ever done was used. I got a job at the publishing house as an editor, okay? So I'm suddenly an editor at the publishing house. I got an apartment, right? So I got a very good job, right? Using everything I did. And I was national director of boys' work for the convention, right? So I was going to travel and speak about the program, right? I'd been a YMCA secretary, right, in Chicago. The wife came, moved right in, and everything ran very well. That led to being in a position to be with Martin. See what I mean? But before that, I was leader of the movement. But remember, I'd been in the movement in Peoria 9 years before Montgomery. I meet Martin King, right? And before it ends, I'm in Chattanooga opening another city. See, we won in Nashville. I get a calling to a church in Chattanooga. I take it, and we open up that city. Then Martin calls me, and so I give up the church in Chattanooga, naturally, and I haven't been a pastor since, right? But I've done all these other kinds of ministries, which I really love and which I feel has so much involved in it.